Okay, it works. Hello, and welcome to an episode of JP Learns History, a series I completely made up just to do one episode and never do one again. Today we are going to talk about a very important war, but also a very much forgotten war, the Korean War. But just because it's mostly forgotten, that doesn't mean it should be, because it is definitely an important piece of history and the key to understanding some very major political and social problems that have happened or is happening in the East. This is the Korean War. So to understand how we came from this to this and to that, we need to understand why the Korean War happened in the first place. So obviously we go to where it all began. So picture this. So it starts with the Japanese taking control of Korea in 1910. The Japanese have a brutal rule over the Koreans, then all of a sudden, boom, World War II happens. And guess what? People hate Japan for obvious reasons. And it does not get any better. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the US and China start kicking Japan all the way back to their homeland. And even though the Japanese were clearly not winning, they still didn't want to surrender. So Truman decided to send them the literal sun, twice. Afterwards, Japan finally surrenders, marking the end of World War II. After that, the US and Soviet Union start to occupy foreign territories. The US occupied Japan and Western Germany, meanwhile the Soviets occupied Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Poland, and Eastern Germany. And of course, one of the territories was Korea. Korea was split along the 38th parallel, with the US occupying the south and the Soviets occupying the north. This occupation was supposed to be temporary, but due to the rise of the Cold War, this led to the creation of two separate governments. In the north was the Communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or just North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung, and the Capitalist Republic of Korea, or South Korea, led by Syngman Rhee, a guy who I literally just learned about as I was writing this. Even though they both had very different ideologies, political ones, they both had one idea in mind: the unification of Korea. And no one wanted it more than Kim Il-sung, who wanted to take full control of Korea and establish his own communist regime. But he couldn't exactly do that without the approval of Stalin. So, he sought approval and believed that swift military action would reunify the two countries. Stalin was also very much excited, seeing an opportunity to expand Soviet influence. And now, the North Koreans, equipped with artillery, Russian T-34 tanks, and aerial support from Soviet MiG-15s, it looks like North Korea was ready to invade. Which leads us to on June 25th, 1950, some 75,000 North Koreans, also known as the KPA, launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel. It didn't take long for the UN to take notice of the invasion, so the UN Security Council passed Resolution 82 condemning the invasion and Resolution 83 calling for member states to assist South Korea. Something important to point out is that even though the vote was passed unanimously, the Soviet Union was actually a veto-wielding power and could have actually vetoed the resolution. But they were in the middle of boycotting the UN Security Council because of removing China's seat and replacing it with Taiwan's. South Korea was getting hit hard. North Koreans had consumed almost the entire Korean peninsula, taking major key cities like Seoul. Truman, worried, sent General MacArthur, the commander of the US forces in the Far East, to take control of the situation. He was quickly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Command, which made him responsible for leading all of US and UN nations into Korea. The UN and South Korean forces held a stand at the Pusan perimeter, a defensive line around the city of Pusan. The Allies held on, allowing for more reinforcements and supplies to answer for the UN and South Korean troops, and the prevention of North Korea taking full control of the Korean peninsula. But that all changes when General MacArthur proposed a move that would change the entire course of the war. In September 1950, the North Korean forces were hitting hard on the Pusan perimeter. Knowing that it wouldn't hold, MacArthur quickly proposed a counteroffensive. The Incheon Landing, also known as Operation Bromide, the plan was to cut off KPA supplies, retake the city of Seoul, and stop the KPA advance. Though it was risky due to many things like tile variations, heavily fortified and narrow channels, and the risk of civilian casualty, MacArthur was sure it would be a swift battle. So, on the 15th of September, 1950, MacArthur led a fleet of 4 cruisers, 7 destroyers, 261 naval vessels, and 40,000 infantry into Incheon, with the help of naval bombardment and airstrikes, softening North Korean defenses. Even with great resistance, the KPA was outnumbered, and the battle ended quickly, making it a decisive victory for the United States and the United Nations. After the successful victory, just one day later, UN and ROK troops began to break out of the Pusan perimeter to help recapture Seoul alongside UN troops coming from Incheon. Seoul was later recaptured on September 25th. Thanks to napalm airstrikes, the KPA was heavily wounded and trapped in the south. The following October, UN soldiers and ROK troops moved up north, past the 38th parallel and into North Korea. The dream of unification was almost a reality. When MacArthur started moving towards the Yalu River, he had one fatal flaw that would also change the entire course of the war. And that was underestimating China. Despite numerous warnings from the Chinese, MacArthur thought the chances of Chinese intervention were unlikely. For context, before the war, the Chinese Civil War had ended, leaving communism victorious in China. Their new leader, Mao Zedong, is in the midst of rebuilding China after the war, when Stalin calls, asking to give aid to the North Korean invasion. In the beginning, Mao was hesitant because he was already in the midst of rebuilding a war-torn China. But with encouragement from Stalin, he gladly assisted by sending Chinese volunteers, who were just regular soldiers. If you don't know what the Yalu is, the Yalu River is a river that sits on the border between China and North Korea. When UN forces started advancing towards the Yalu River, Mao was worried that a full UN assault was heading towards China. So China warned the United States that if they approached the Yalu River, they would intervene. And what's crazy is that MacArthur himself was crazy. Hear this. He actually wanted to go to war with China, thinking that the war should extend to China in the form of bombing Chinese places and Chinese supply lines. Hell, he even advocated for the use of nukes in China. Truman, who just wanted to contain the Korean Peninsula and not go to total war with China and the Soviets, disapproved of MacArthur's approach. MacArthur later sent a letter to Representative Joseph Martin, the House Minority Leader, criticizing Truman's policy. And he did this publicly, with other public statements advocating for his own crazy strategies. The last straw for Truman is when, in March of 1951, MacArthur gave an ultimatum to the Chinese, demanding that they withdraw from
North Korea
would be severe consequences. Truman, tired of his insubordinates, relieved General MacArthur of command on April 11, 1951, and replaced him with General Matthew Ridgway. And not without some backlash from Americans who saw MacArthur as a respectable figure and a hero. Man, MacArthur is crazy. So the point is, we didn't listen. And we flew too close to the sun, and everything went to hell real quick. China began its first phase at the Battle of Ongjong, then the Battle of Usan, which they both won, using ambush and encirclement tactics. Then China moved on to the second phase of the intervention, at the Battle of the Chongwon River, which they won successfully, and at the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, which is one of the most brutal battles of the Korean War, in which 10,495 soldiers lost their lives, and more, with 7,388 Marines died due to the harsh cold. China, even though with many casualties, successfully pushed UN forces back to the 38th parallel by January of 1951, and recaptured Seoul along with KPA forces on January 4th of the same year. Many operations took place during this time, like Operation Thunderbolt, a counteroffensive aimed to take back lost territory, like Seoul, in which they did on March 15, 1951. There was also Operation Ripper, which aimed to push Chinese and North Korean forces north of the Han River. In doing so, also capturing key locations like Hongchong and Chungcheong. Also important battles were Heartbreak Ridge and Bloody Ridge. Heartbreak Ridge was one of the longest battles in the Korean War, lasting from September 13th to October 15th. In Bloody Ridge, where the battle's victory paved the way for other subsequent operations. From mid-1951 to mid-1953, an intense stalemate put both sides on deadlock. Soon, a call for an armistice is in progress, which leads us to the end. On July 27, 1953, Representative of the United Nations Command, General Mark W. Clark, along with North Korean Representative General Nam Il, and Chinese Representative General Peng Da-hu, met at Panmunjom also known as the JSA, a village located near the Dominican Parallel, to sign the Korean Armistice. The armistice established a ceasefire between North Korea and South Korea, and also established the demilitarized zone, also known as the DMZ, which is one of the most fortified borders on the planet. It also created the Military Armistice Commission, aka the UNCMAC, or as I like to call it, UNCMAC, a commission made to oversee any conflicts happening across the DMZ. Another thing that came with the armistice was the repartition of POWs, also known as Operation Big Switch. 75,823 communist POWs were returned, and 12,773 UN prisoners were returned, including 3,598 Americans. POWs who did not want to return to communism were released as free citizens in South Korea. One important thing to mention is that an armistice is not a peace treaty, just a ceasefire. So no peace treaty was ever signed, meaning that North and South Korea are still technically at war to this day. The Korean War has had a significant lasting impact on both sides, with South Korea growing from a war-torn country to the world's largest economies, while North Korea almost turned into a successful country. But remember, communism. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the country fell into harsh famine and economic struggle. The war also had influences on other countries like China. The war solidified China as a significant player in global affairs, and to this day still has ties to North Korea. It also changed the tactics of war, paving the way to the development of new firearms, next-gen jet fighters, the extensive use of artillery, and the first use of helicopters and medical evacuations. A great example of this would be in the later Vietnam War, which is also kind of similar to Korea, but with an actual winner and not a stalemate. Today, the quest for unification and peace still goes on in the Korean Peninsula, albeit not very easy that North Korea has nuclear weapons, and tensions still rising at the border, but efforts have been made for peace, though sadly not very effective. And that concludes my video. Hopefully I get an A on this project, or I'll just cry. And also a quick side note before I end the video. This video doesn't exactly go into full depth of the war and isn't exactly accurate, I personally believe. And hopefully this was enough to give you an idea of what the war is in a nutshell. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. And now the credits. And yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoy the video. Bye bye. With the blessing of our great Almighty God.